It's 7 p.m. Friday, April 12th here in Seoul.
Coming up at NEWSCENTER tonight. Leaders of South Korea and the U.S. reconfirmed their will for a nuclear-free Korean peninsula while leaving the door open for further dialogue. President Moon says he will push for another round of inter-Korean talks, to which President Trump requested a relay of North Korea's stance.
Major changes in North Korea's power structure. We look at who's rising through the ranks and who's being replaced and what this all means.
South Korea wins its WTO appeal over a dispute on import bans on all Japanese fishery products from around Fukushima.
BTS is back with a new album, and K-pop fans across the globe are rushing to get their hands on a copy. The album is already a bestseller on Amazon, with its intro track recording almost 30 million views on YouTube just weeks after its release. NEWSCENTER begins now. Good evening and welcome to Arirang NEWSCENTER, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Noah.
And I'm Han-dan. Thank you as always for joining us. We'll begin with the results of the closely watched South Korea-U.S. Summit. Presidents Moon and Trump have agreed to keep dialogue alive with North Korea in the hope of resolving the current nuclear deadlock.
Yes, but President Trump also said that North Korean sanctions will remain in place. Our Shin Se-min leading us off tonight from Washington.
No change on sanctions, but the door to dialogue with the North remains open. U.S. President Donald Trump sitting across from President Moon Jae-in in the White House, reiterating his view that sanctions against the regime have to stay in full force. However, he said channels of communication should stay open with Pyongyang as they work toward the regime's full and final denuclearization. President Trump said the hardline policy toward the North should also extend to halt joint projects between the two Koreas until Pyongyang makes good on its promises.
How much do you support my president's push for economic concessions, which includes the resumption of the joint inter-Korean industrial complex and perhaps even the...
Well, at the right time, I would have great support. This isn't the right time, but at the right time, I'd have great support.
He added sanctions to pressure North Korean leader Kim Jong-un are at a level that's fair. Asked if he would take a smaller deal to keep the talks going, the U.S. president said he'd have to see what the deal is, as there are various smaller deals that could happen. But in the meantime, President Trump said he's looking to strike a big deal with the regime, which means the complete eradication of the North's nuclear program. During the first real indication of how the North Korea nuclear talks will proceed in the aftermath of the Hanoi summit, Presidents Moon and Trump agreed that every step taken is a step forward.
그래서 이제 그 중요한 것은 대화의 모멘텀을 계속 유지시켜 나가고 또 가까운 시일 내에 제3차 북미회담이 열릴 수 있으리라는 그런 전망을 세계에 심어주는 것이 중요하다고 생각합니다.
The two allies also cemented their stances that their top-down approach is the key to denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. Amid the fine-tuning to reach the end goal of a nuclear-free Korean peninsula, the door to progress still remains open, including at the next summit meeting between leaders Kim and Trump, and even a three-way summit with President Moon Jae-in, all of which depends on when and how the North Korean leader makes his next move. Shin Se-min, Arirang News, Washington.
Prior to the summit, President Moon held separate talks with three top U.S. officials, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Our Park Hee-jun now reports on how the talks went with the top officials known for their hardline North Korea policy.
President Moon Jae-in has stressed the importance of restarting talks between North Korea and the U.S. as quickly as possible. Ahead of his summit with U.S. President Donald Trump, President Moon met with Vice President Mike Pence at the White House on Thursday and reaffirmed the close alliance between Seoul and Washington. He said the Hanoi summit was just part of the process leading to North Korea's denuclearization, and he promised to do everything possible to achieve peace and denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. Pence said the U.S. will keep its positive stance with North Korea and keep the door open for dialogue. He also said he's hopeful the U.S. can restart talks with the North. President Moon also sat down with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton, key U.S. negotiators leading the dialogue with North Korea. President Moon said it's crucial to achieve results through top-down diplomacy and expressed confidence that it will be possible. Appreciating the effort Pompeo and Bolton are putting in to achieve peace and denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, President Moon asked for their continued cooperation with their South Korean counterparts. Pompeo and Bolton promised to keep talks going with North Korea at various levels. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
South Korea's rival political parties gave mixed assessments of the latest Seoul-Washington summit. The ruling party was full of positivity, while the opposition bloc had their doubts. Kim Min-ji reports.
The ruling Democratic Party called the latest Moon-Trump meeting a great success, saying that it reaffirmed the two countries' strong alliance. It noted that both sides said top-down diplomacy is essential to the peacemaking process, and that they share an understanding on the need to find middle point on the one-go denuclearization deal Washington wants and North Korea's step-by-step approach.
When North Korea lays out a roadmap for complete denuclearization during a possible inter-Korean summit in the near future, it could help get some sanctions lifted, which would be another opportunity to improve Pyongyang-Washington ties.
But the main opposition Liberty Korea party claimed the summit failed to meet expectations, questioning whether there was any point in holding the summit in the first place. The Conservative Party said that prior to the summit, the government signaled that the U.S. was open to a good enough deal, but it turned out that wasn't the case. It also criticized the government for eyeing another summit with Pyongyang, despite any progress toward denuclearization.
This is the reality of the Moon Jae-in government, again pushing for peace and dialogue with North Korea. This is clearly a kind of maneuver, as it works to set up another summit.
The minor Paramita party said that while the summit was a good opportunity to keep alive the momentum for the stalled denuclearization talks, it also showed there is a clear divide between Seoul and Washington when it comes to the issues of sanctions and support, and that South Korea faces the task of narrowing that gap.
President Moon Jae-in and his government need a very careful approach.
The minor Party for Democracy and Peace voiced concerns that the summit lacks substance, needed to take the peninsula a step closer towards denuclearization. The Progressive Justice Party had a little more optimism, expressing hope that the latest summit could pave the way for another inter-Korean summit soon. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
The newly elected members of North Korea's Spring People's Assembly had their first meeting on Thursday, where they re-elected Kim Jong-un as chairman of the regime's powerful State Affairs Commission. No surprise, perhaps, but there were some changes in the cabinet and the parliament we should look out for. Or Oh Jung-hee with more.
North Korea's power structure gets reshuffled, with the regime's leader Kim Jong-un further strengthening his grip on power. North Korea's Supreme People's Assembly, the regime's rubber stamp parliament that was newly formed last month, held its first meeting on Thursday, Pyongyang state-run Korean Central News Agency reports. Kim Jong-un was re-elected as the chairman of the State Affairs Commission, the North Korean government's top policy-making body. The regime's ceremonial leader Kim Yong-nam stepped down from his role as president of the parliament's presidium, with Cho Yang-ho taking over the post. But Cho, at the same time, doubles as the first vice chairman of the State Affairs Commission below Kim Jong-un. Analysts say this means that Kim Jong-un will be the one acting as the ceremonial leader as well.
Kim Jong-un's power has been strengthened through the recent party meetings and the Supreme People's Assembly. Kim Jong-un has now risen to the post where he serves as both the practical and ceremonial leader of the state.
While Pyongyang state-run media didn't provide the details on how the regime modified its constitution, experts say that it could have been revised in a way that further cemented Kim Jong-un's power. The North also showed that it's preparing for future talks with the U.S. Figures deeply involved in nuclear negotiations with the U.S., the top negotiator Kim Yong-chol, Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho, and Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee all became members of the State Affairs Commission. Pyongyang's premier of the cabinet, Park Bong-ju, was replaced by Kim Jae-ryong, a figure who's been recognized for making economic achievements in Taekwondo province. This reflects the North's recent policy direction to build a self-supporting economy. The meeting of the Supreme People's Assembly continued on Friday, and the results are expected to be out during the weekend. According to Seoul's Unification Ministry, this is the first time in 19 years that the North's parliamentary meeting has lasted for longer than one day. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Turning to some other news now, and the World Trade Organization has ruled in favor of South Korea's ban against some Japanese fishery imports, reversing an earlier decision against the restrictions. The ban was imposed following the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster. Our Kim Hae-sung reports.
South Korea has won its appeal at the World Trade Organization over its dispute on import bans on Japanese seafood. Following the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011, the Korean government slapped a temporary import ban on Japanese food. It then extended the ban to all fishery products from 8 Japanese prefectures around Fukushima in 2013 and enacted additional testing requirements. In 2015, Tokyo filed a complaint with the WTO against the restrictions. After siding with Japan in its first ruling in 2018, the WTO said in its final ruling that South Korea's measures were not overly restrictive and did not unfairly discriminate against Tokyo.
The government welcomes the WTO's final ruling. Since losing the first ruling, we formed a dispute response team with various related ministries to come up with follow-up measures. We believe the final ruling is a reflection of our efforts. With the WTO ruling, all existing import bans on Japan will stay in place.
In a statement, Japanese Foreign Minister Taro Kono said the WTO's ruling was regrettable and said Tokyo wants negotiations with Seoul to end the restrictions. Since the import ban in 2011, Japanese seafood imports to South Korea have fallen from over 70,000 tons to around 20,000 tons a year. According to Japan's Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, after inspecting 170,000 agricultural and fishery products last year, 18% of its agricultural goods and 7% of its fishery goods were found to contain radioactive cesium.
When it comes to radioactive materials, there's no such thing as safe thresholds. Just a slight exposure to cesium can cause cancer. Cesium from Japanese seafood in the 8 prefectures was 9 times higher than permissible levels. That's not safe at all.
Around 50 countries across the world, including China, have some sort of ban on Japanese food imports in place since 2011. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
Now let's take a closer look at a landmark ruling that was made yesterday by South Korea's Constitutional Court. The court ruled that the country's ban on abortion is unconstitutional and must be lifted. Our Lee Min-sun explains what this historic decision implies and what it means going forward.
7 out of 9 justices of the Constitutional Court agreed on Thursday that the 66-year-old law banning abortion was unconstitutional because it limits women's rights to pursue their own destinies. The current law bans abortion in most cases, except for rape, incest, severe genetic disease, or if the mother's health is in danger. Under the current law, women who have an intentional miscarriage can face up to 1 year in prison or a fine of about $1,800. And doctors or other practitioners who perform abortions can face up to 2 years in prison. In 2012, the Constitutional Court came close to lifting the ban, with 4 voting in favor and 4 against, as 1 justice was absent. Thursday's court decision reflects the changing social perspectives on abortion and women's rights. The National Assembly will have until next year to amend the law, and lawmakers need to specify the details of the amendment, including at which stage of pregnancy abortion should be possible, whether to confirm reasons for abortion, or whether to have a mandatory consultation or cooling-off period. And legal and medical experts are debating whether the court decision will affect undergoing trials and at which stage of pregnancy a fetus can be removed. Medical personnel also say that there should be a discussion over whether doctors have the right to refuse performing abortions based on their individual beliefs. Lee Min-sun, Arirang News.
A new memorial space has opened in Seoul's Gwanghwamun Square for the more than 300 people who died on board the Sewol-Ho-Ferry, whose sinking in 2014 was Korea's worst ever maritime disaster. The new memorial replaces an altar that had been there for almost 5 years. The city of Seoul says this space will be more than just a reminder of the tragedy. Our Cho Yang-ho takes us to the scene.
At the opening ceremony for the new memorial, Seoul Mayor Park Won-sun said he could not leave the space empty after the original altar was removed. Because the sinking of the Sewol-ho was more than a disaster, it prompted Koreans to ask what the purpose of their government is.
Here I affirm that our country can never allow such a disaster to happen again. We should continue to use this space for commemoration and to remember the very reason our government exists.
So the space isn't just for the Sewol-Ferry disaster, it symbolizes a commitment to making the country safe. Under the theme of memory and light, this memorial space brings people together to remember the victims of the Sewol-Ferry disaster. People are invited to see not only photos of those who died, but also paintings commemorating the efforts of their families to find out what really caused the tragedy. People can also watch a video showing a timeline of events from the day of the tragedy to the removal of the altar. They can also experience an entirely different feeling in a space that's completely closed and lit only by candles. This artwork, the city says, is supposed to encourage a feeling of solace.
This space is meaningful because in our daily lives, it helps us citizens be more aware of disasters.
This space needed to be made so that we never see something like the Sewol-ho disaster again.
A memorial service will take place this Saturday here in central Seoul ahead of the 5th anniversary of the ferry's sinking, next Tuesday, April 16th. Cho Yang-ho, Arirang News.
The funeral for late Hanjin Group chairman Cho Yang-ho, who turned Korean Air into a global operator, began today in Seoul and will last until Tuesday. Our Cha Sang-mi has more from Yonsei Severance Hospital, where Cho's funeral services are taking place.
The funeral for late Hanjin Group chairman Cho Yang-ho began Friday. This 70-year-old died of chronic lung disease in a hospital in Los Angeles on Sunday local time, with his family by his side. The body of Cho Yang-ho arrived at Incheon International Airport from Los Angeles early on Friday morning and was moved here to the funeral home of Seoul's Yonsei Severance Hospital, where politicians and business leaders have been turning up to pay him their respects. Cho's only son, Cho Won-tae, who is widely expected to be his successor, spoke after arriving at the airport.
I feel burdened. We stayed by his side when he passed away. He told us to run the company and cooperate together. I'll discuss the future with family.
President Moon Jae-in and Prime Minister Lee Na-kyun sent condolence flowers, while business moguls such as Chung Mong-jun, a billionaire with a controlling stake in Hyundai Heavy Industries, and Han Chang-soo, the president of Korea's other big airline, Asiana, visited Friday. Cho's death comes less than 2 weeks after he was removed from his chairman position on the board of Korean Air. His family has been embroiled in a series of scandals in recent years, including verbal and physical abuse against employees, as well as his daughter Cho Yeon-a's infamous nut rage incident. Cho himself was indicted on multiple charges, including embezzlement and tax evasion last year. Cho will be buried on Tuesday at his family's cemetery in Yongin, Gyeonggi-do Province. Cha Sang-mi, Arirang News.
The end of the 180-day exemption period for U.S. sanctions on Iran is fast approaching, and it looks like it'll be hard for South Korea and 7 other countries to extend their exemptions this time around. Our Lee Ji-won tells us more.
The U.S. is toughening its stance on exempting countries from its sanctions on Iran following President Donald Trump's orders. A South Korean official told reporters this Friday, adding that even if the U.S. does extend its exemptions, countries will have to cut their crude oil imports drastically. The official, who is familiar with the ongoing talks with the U.S. on the matter, said the reasoning behind the decision is that the sanctions worked better than expected, giving Washington more confidence in tightening its grip on Tehran while being able to keep global crude oil prices stable. The news comes as a surprise to Seoul, as it was expecting an extension of the waiver, which is scheduled to end May 3rd. The official said because the talks for the first round of waivers went so well, Seoul and Washington had a mutual understanding over how the second round of waivers would go. But then came Washington's sudden change in tone. To this, Seoul is continuing its request for an exemption. South Korea imports condensate or ultra-light oil from Iran, which, according to the official, is technically not the target of U.S. sanctions. Seoul allegedly argued that it has stopped importing Iranian crude oil, the main target of the sanctions, and that it would be fair to first stop other countries from importing crude oil. To this, the U.S. allegedly said that it is ultimately trying to sanction Iran's overall energy industry to cut off any funds that could be used to finance terrorism or acts of aggression. The source also said no matter how much condensate South Korea buys from Iran, not a single penny can be used for such purposes. The two countries have been trading in Korean won through accounts in Korean banks, and since South Korea's currency has a low convertibility, the official said this method of transaction prevents U.S. dollars or other foreign currencies from flowing into Iran. Seoul also told Washington that its petrochemical industry could face serious collateral damage if the exemption is not extended. South Korea, Japan, and 6 other countries were given exemptions from Washington's toughest ever sanctions on Iran last November. The sanctions followed the U.S. withdrawal from the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran in May last year, as the deal, quote, had not stopped Iran from developing its ballistic missile program. 이지원, Arirang News.
Korea signed a deal worth over $1 billion to sell 3 1,400-ton submarines to Indonesia. The Defense Acquisition Program Administration said Friday the signing ceremony for the deal between Korea's Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering and the Indonesian government took place in Bandung, West Java. It's the second submarine project Korea has inked with Indonesia. The Southeast Asian country has been referred to as a special strategic partner in terms of the arms industry under the Moon administration's new Southern policy. The Arms Procurement Agency says the deal is also a major achievement of its Defense Export Promotion Center, an arms export promotion center launched last November to help domestic defense firms expand into overseas markets. Now moving on to the entertainment business, BTS released their latest album less than 2 hours ago, drawing attention from K-pop fans in all corners of the world. Our Jong-un has a story.
Today's the day K-pop fans around the world have been waiting for. South Korean idol group BTS returned to the music scene with the release of their new album, Map of the Soul, Persona. The boy band released the new album globally at 6 p.m. Korean time on Friday. But even before its release, the album has shown it will be a big hit, having topped Amazon's online store CDs and vinyls sales since pre-orders began almost a month ago. The music video for the new album's intro track, Persona, uploaded in late March, has more than 29 million YouTube views so far, while the first teaser for the main track, Boy With Love, got 26 million views in less than 5 days after its release on Monday. And to promote the new album to a global audience, the band left for the US on Wednesday night to premiere their new tracks on NBC's Saturday Night Live this weekend. Following their album release, the band will continue their Love Yourself, Speak Yourself World Stadium Tour in May, traveling to Los Angeles, São Paulo, London, Paris, and Osaka. Meanwhile, another global K-pop sensation, Blackpink, is also making history. Besides seeing their music video for Kill This Love reach 100 million YouTube views in a record time, Blackpink will be the first all-girl K-pop group to take to the stage at Coachella in its 20-year history when they perform at the music festival in California this Friday local time. To show its support to the group, YouTube announced it will be broadcasting their performance live on the big screen at Times Square in New York City. 원정환, 아리랑 뉴스.
South Korea's finance ministry has warned that a slowing global economy and lower demand for semiconductors could weigh heavily on the local economy. The ministry's monthly economic assessment says Korea's exports fell more than 8% on year in March. Exports of chips fell almost 17%, mainly due to a drop in global prices, as well as China's economic slowdown. The ministry vowed to accelerate policies such as an extra budget to help revitalize the sluggish economy. Martial artists from South and North Korea put on a joint Taekwondo performance on Thursday in Switzerland as part of their European tour. The show marked the 25th anniversary of Taekwondo becoming an Olympic sport. On Friday, they're scheduled to perform at the United Nations in Geneva. The Korean government has issued an advisory over the risks of mosquitoes carrying the Japanese encephalitis virus. The advisory comes after so-called small red house mosquitoes were found in Jeju Island earlier this month. In most cases, the virus has no symptoms, but severe cases can be life-threatening, especially for older people. Last year, Korea reported 17 cases with 1 death. The National Immunization Program provides vaccines for those under 12 years old. Spring is here, and that means Seoul's famous Gyeongbokgung Palace will be open to tourists at night starting later this month. Nighttime opening hours will start from 7 to 9:30 p.m. on the 26th, in time for the Royal Culture Festival, which runs from that day to May 5th. After the festival, the palace will stay open late in the last 2 weeks of each month until October, except for the month of August. Tickets will cost 3,000 won, or about $2.50, but visitors wearing traditional Korean hanbok can get in for free. That's your 3-minute news flash. News in depth coming up next.
The leaders of South Korea and the U.S. met in Washington for their long-anticipated summit on Friday, mainly to discuss ways to resolve North Korea's nuclear issue. The two sides reconfirmed their ultimate goal, which is the final and complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, while leaving the door for dialogue open to North Korea. President Moon also said he'll push for another inter-Korean summit soon, to which Mr. Trump said he wants to hear what North Korea says. For more analysis on Friday's summit, let's turn to Dr. Woo Jung-yup from the Sejong Institute, who now joins us in the studio. It's always good to have you with us.
My pleasure.
How do you assess the summit in general? Do you think many uncertainties have been clarified regarding North Korea's nuclear issue?
I think to assess the outcome of the summit, we first need to have a criteria, what kind of criteria that we are going to apply to assess the summit this time. So if you expect that this summit is about to produce like detailed plan to have North Korea back to the negotiation table, then you might not be satisfied with the result. However, if the summit is in Korea's effort to maintain the process of this negotiation, I think that we can acknowledge that South Korea's effort is finally rewarded by the U.S. Confirmation that U.S. is also interested in the dialogue with North Korea. So I think, as President Trump mentioned, that this is a long-term process and it cannot be done overnight. So I think South Korea's effort to keep North Korea on the track of negotiation, so not deviate from the dialogue. So this is the part of a long-term process that South Korea is trying to keep North Korea on the track of negotiation with the international community.
So we should look at it in the long term, and we should encourage North Korea to stay on track of dialogue. But there have been hopes that Presidents Moon and Trump may be able to reach a good enough deal to move things forward and break this nuclear deadlock. But not much has been announced on how South Korea and the U.S. specifically plan to denuclearize North Korea. Your thoughts on that?
So there was the discussion among the public that so-called a good enough deal or any kind of early harvest should be discussed between two leaders to have North Korea back on the track of the negotiation. However, I think the South Korean government was prudent enough not to make it a bigger deal this time. And even when was asked about the question of what can be discussed this time between two presidents, the South Korean government did not really specify that good enough deal or early harvest would be discussed this time. It's only because that it's only like 40 days have passed since Hanoi, and it's very difficult for us to expect that U.S. position on sanctions would be changed with just a short time span. So I think that South Korean government keep telling United States that some kind of incentive should be rewarded to North Korea if North Korea indeed did some meaningful measures for the denuclearization. However, South Korean government probably already know that it's difficult to persuade the U.S. position change in a certain way that North Korea is going to be rewarded with some kind of easing the sanctions or sanction lift. So I think that there was some expectations for that kind of discussions, but I think South Korean government was prudent enough not to make a bigger deal on those issues.
So we shouldn't be too hasty, just wanting for big achievements. And we have to remind ourselves that it hasn't been that long since the fall of the Hanoi summit. Now to sanctions. President Trump has made clear that the sanctions will remain in place, also making clear that no further sanctions are needed at this point. Do you think Seoul and Washington were able to narrow their gap in terms of North Korea's sanctions to a certain extent?
Maybe South Korean government still wanted to have some kind of sanction lifting to give some incentives to the North Korean government for their measures taken to the denuclearization. However, United States has been already known that they are very firm on their stance on keeping the sanctions intact, and it's mainly because that United States confirmed the effectiveness of the sanctions at Hanoi. So I think that United States is going to keep their position until the North Korea is coming back to the negotiation with meeting the demand proposed by the United States. So I think for the time being that the gap between the South Korea and the United States with regard to the easing the sanctions or sanction lifting could not be really narrowed down. However, as a close ally, that two countries are going to discuss in a very close coordination that they are going to discuss what kind of measures can be provided to North Korea as an incentive to come back to the negotiation.
Now, speaking of sanctions, the toughest ever sanctions are still imposed on North Korea, and opinions still remain divided on whether the tough sanctions would speed up North Korea's denuclearization process or it would just worsen the current nuclear deadlock by heightening tensions. Your take?
So I think chief negotiator of South Korean government, Mr. Lee Do-hoon, mentioned a couple of days ago that sanctions can deter North Korea from making bad provocations. However, it's not easy for sanctions to achieve the denuclearization of North Korea. So the view to the sanctions are different from South Korea and the United States. After Hanoi, it is almost like a consensus within Washington that sanctions are actually effective in shaping North Korea's behavior. So the consensus is like time is on U.S. side. So North Korea is going to have much more sufferings from the economic sanctions onto North Korea. So U.S. can wait. However, from South Korean view that it can give some hard times to North Korea, but it's difficult to change North Korea's strategic mind because North Korea has been dealing with this kind of economic hardships before, and they have an arduous march in early 90s. So they can undergo this kind of hardship. So it is true that North Korea has a hard time under the sanctions, but whether North Korea is going to change their strategic direction is not agreed between South Korea and the United States, especially in the experts group. So I think that, those kind of gaps should be discussed in a more closed way between Washington and Seoul.
Now, President Moon also held talks with Pompeo, Bolton, and Pence, and these three officials are known for their hardline North Korea policy. Do you think President Moon was able to tilt their stance on North Korea over to a more favorable territory?
Maybe if President Moon aimed to change their mind with just a 30-minute talk with them, it would not be successful. However, this kind of effort given by President Moon to to the main negotiators from the U.S. side is going to give the ideas that what kind of measures would be necessary to change North Korea's strategic decision. And since President Moon Jae-in is the only person that spent much longer time with Kim Jong-un for last 2 years, and the relations between President Trump and Kim Jong-un is very much different from the relations between President Moon and Kim Jong-un. So I think, based on his experience with Kim Jong-un, that there is much to tell from President Moon to the staff from the U.S. side that there are some measures can be taken from the U.S. side to have North Korea back to the negotiation and ultimately to achieve the denuclearization of North Korea.
President Moon said he will push for another round of inter-Korean talks soon, while also inviting Mr. Trump to Seoul for talks, and the possibility of a trilateral summit among Seoul, Pyongyang, and Washington were also raised. What are your perspectives on these future summits?
First, that three-way summit is, I think, a far-fetched idea at this juncture, because there is not much things agreed upon between the United States and North Korea, and even there's a gap between South and North Korea. So it has been known, and the National Security Advisor, Mr. Jong-un, told the National Assembly the other day that South Korean government tried to reach out to North Korea, but there was no positive response from North Korea, because that is why the South Korean government could not have interactions with North Korea before we had a summit last night. So I think that the situation has not changed much by the summit that we had last night, because no incentives were discussed between two leaders of South Korea and the United States. So I think it's still very unlikely that North Korea is just coming back to the table and coming back to the table with the South Korea like in April or May. So I think that we still need some time to wait until North Korea makes some kind of decisions.
I was just about to ask you that. Do you because some reports many reports actually are suggesting that another round of inter-Korean talks may be possible sometime around April 27th, marking exact 1 year since the first summit between President Moon and Kim Jong-un, but you don't think that will be likely?
So logistically, it's still possible because it's just a couple hours away from Seoul to Pyongyang, right? However, it seems like that North Korea has not made up their mind yet after Hanoi. So North Korea has to review their decision-making process, what went wrong in Hanoi, and what should they do if they want to come back to the negotiation with the United States. And there's a discussion that Kim Jong-un is going to visit Russia, and the Chinese President Xi Jinping is going to visit Pyongyang. So from the North Korea's point of view, that his meeting with the Russian President Putin and his meeting with the Chinese President Xi Jinping might be more important at this juncture than to have a meeting with the President Moon, because at the summit last night that there's nothing much to be delivered to North Korea. So I think that if North Korea fixed the time for the visiting Russia and fixed the date for the Chinese president's visit to Pyongyang, then we might have a clear view that whether North Korea is interested in having talks with the President Moon, whether in Panmunjom or somewhere else.
I think that's a very good point you raised there, that North Korean leader is yet to make his trip to Russia or China. Now, moving on to North Korea's domestic politics, the Supreme People's Assembly held its first session Thursday, where Kim Jong-un was re-elected as the chairman of the State Affairs Commission, solidifying his power. And Cho Yang-ho earned two major positions, each in government and the parliament. How do you see these changes, and what are some of the things that we should look out for?
So there was a discussion that Chairman Kim might be able to assume the position of the nominal leader of North Korea. So Kim Yong-nam was replaced by Cho Yang-ho, like second person of North Korea this time, and Kim Jong-un still is not the nominal leader of North Korea. And there was some shuffling in his cabinet, and the members of party party there. So there's some shift and there's a replacement of old generations with the new generations. However, the more important part is what kind of implications that this kind of shuffling has to the negotiation with the United States or international community. So previously, this kind of shuffling or this kind of signaling has some meaning to the international community. So international community interpret the signals sent by North Korea, and they make some proposals to North Korea to come back to the negotiation. However, after Hanoi, U.S. position has been changed that U.S. is not going to respond this kind of signals. U.S. is going to respond to the direct message from North Korea, not by like nuanced signals sent by North Korea. So if North Korea believes that their way of communication in the past, like signaling or nuance-based communication, is still working, then United States has different thoughts. So I think that if North Korea still believes that it works, then it might be a miscalculation from North Korean side.
All right, Dr. Ru, thank you so much for your perspectives today.
Thank you.
Now it is that time to take a look at some of the digital media content available on Arirang's website and other social media platforms.
And today we'll be looking at a small tech firm with a very diverse workforce. Take a look.
테스톡스는 이제 크게 두 가지 지금 일을 하고 있는데, 하나는 소프트웨어 테스팅 업무를 전문적으로 수행을 하고 있고요. 또 하나 지금 요즘 신사업을 하고 있는 것이 인공지능 데이터 분야입니다. 인공지능 데이터의 구축과 가공, 그리고 설계 이런 것들이 필요해서 저희가 이제 인공지능 사업 분야를 또 확장을 하고 있습니다.
테스톡스는 장애, 성별에 상관없이 누구나 고용의 기회가 주어져야 한다고 믿고 있습니다. 처음 시작할 때는 고민도 많이 했을 뿐만 아니라 과연 될까라는 의심도 했고요. 그리고 엄청나게 힘들었습니다. 그런데 지금의 생각이 달라진 건 뭐냐면 그게 장애 유형에 빗댄 소통의 어려움이 아니라 이게 누구나 다 사람이기 때문에, 그러니까 장애 유형으로부터 오는 것이 아닌 사람이기 때문에 생기는 서로 다름의 차이라고 느끼고 있습니다. 장애나 성별에 대한 것보다는 오히려 훨씬 더 많이 능력 중심으로, 그리고 그 사람의 의지나 하고자 하는 노력 중심으로 바라보고 평가하고 있습니다.
지금보다도 훨씬 더 젊은 40대 초반이나 중반의 옛날에 같이 일하던 동료들을 봐도 직장을 옮긴다든가 일을 찾는 데 있어서 굉장히 어려움을 겪는 모습들을 많이 봤었어요. 근데 그런 모습을 본 이후 벌써 제가 한 8년, 10년 가까이 지난 현재 상태에서 제가 그쪽 일을 다시 원래 하던 일을 연속해서 한다는 거는 거의 불가능한 일이더라고요. 기본적으로는 환갑 때까지는 일해야 되지 않을까라는 생각을 하고 있고요. 주어지는 일이나 또 주변에서 일어나는 기회들에 대해서 내가 할 수 있는 것들을 열심히 찾고, 또 그럼으로써 제가 실력적으로나 여러 가지 인성적으로나 성장할 수 있는 그런 것들을 찾으려고 노력을 하고 있습니다.
기술적인 전문성을 근거해서 더 많은 분들한테 더 의미 있는 기회를 드리는 게 저희 목표고요. 자동화하고 효율화할 수 있는 건 최대한 저희가 인공지능 기반으로 기술을 개발해서 효율화를 하고 따라올 수밖에 없는 여러 가지 수동 리소스들이 있습니다. 수동 업무들이 있는데 그런 일들은 최대한 저희가 이런 분들에게 더 기회를 드릴 수 있도록 더 업무를 더 잘 설계하고 더 잘 관리해서 고객도 만족하고 더 많은 분들한테 기회를 드릴 수 있도록 성장하는 게 저희의 목표입니다.
The weather is warming up nicely, perfect for an outing.
That's right, but it is useful to have a face mask handy as fine dust particles are expected to accumulate through the night. For details, let's turn to our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle, what's the latest?
Good evening, guys. Now, due to the stagnant airflow in the atmosphere, some areas will get high levels of fine dust tonight until tomorrow. But besides that, the Northeast Asian countries will be under partly cloudy skies in the morning, which will give way to a bit more cloudy skies during the afternoon. Now, the morning temperatures are warming up day by day. Seoul will wake up to 6 degrees Celsius tomorrow, while Busan and Jeju gets a warmer start, heading up to 10 degrees. Now, daily highs will rise higher than today, feeling very comfortable to walk around outside and to see the spring flowers. Highs ranging between 17 to 20 degrees across the country. Saturday may be your last chance to go see the flower sites since strong rainstorm is tracking into the peninsula on Sunday. Now, the storm will be accompanied by thunder and lightning and also with gusty wind as well, so please be safe. And after the rain, we will see a slight drop in our mercury, but it will rise back up very quickly. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
And that wraps up this edition of Arirang News. Thank you for watching.
We'll be back same time on Monday, so until then, goodbye.